All right. Today, we're going to go over grids and how they're used. And here we go. Grids are a skeletal framework used to control content within a spatial field. Grids provide a sequence of procedures for exploration and selection of content. Grids help the designer make decisions. Structure and space. Space equals common denominator for type. Single letter is a point, a sentence is a line, and a paragraph is a plane. Type elements introduced into space, the page plane, create divisions that create spatial structure. So for example, typography in a space can be just floating around, just like as if it was in outer space. By laying a grid structure down on the page plane, we can then start organizing our information in an organized and logical manner. Grids have been around since the earliest written forms, from columns used in the cuneiform and Egyptian hieroglyphs to the letterpress. The mechanization of letterpress printing emphasized the rectangular grid structure. Text was set into blocks with margins. Experiments by futurists, Dadaists, constructivists, de Stijl, and breakthroughs at the Bauhaus contributed to its development. Writings and design by Jan Tschichold, the new typography in 1928, started experimenting with what a grid could be. And here's an example of a grid going out into perspective. The modern grid, writings and design by Swiss designer Joseph Müller-Brockmann, Grid Systems and Graphic Design. He was a leader in the development of the international typographic style during the 50s and 60s. His posters are as fresh today as they were then. The grid system is an aid, not a guarantee. It permits a number of possible uses, and each designer can look for a solution appropriate to his personal style. But one must learn how to use the grid. It is an art that requires practice. Joseph Müller-Brockmann. So we have contemporary grids. Now grids are as ubiquitous as carriers of information. The grid system is again emphasized on the screen. Everything that is designed on your phone screen, on your computer screen, is using a contemporary grid. There's nothing we're going around that doesn't have a grid. The three that we're starting with as we start this semester off, and we're going to be building on this. These are kind of the basics, the columnar, the modular, and the improvisational. But because this is, like I said, a level 2 class, we're going to be diving deeper into more elaborate grids as time goes on. But I want to make sure we all understand and we're all on the same page with the basics. And so this first project we just completed was using a columnar grid, just columns and margins. And let's talk about what that means. Before we get started with grids, the designer needs to understand what content is going in the grid. What's the type size, the line length, and interline spacing or leading? If you change one, all of them have to be changed. And so this is definitely when we're talking about sequential design, we really have to think about our leading and our point size before we get into a project. So here's 3 examples of a horizontal grid that has different leading units. All the typefaces and all 3 of these paragraphs are 12 point. The first one on the left is a 12 over 12 point leading. The second one is 12 over 15 point leading. And the third is 12 over 18 point leading. I'd love to hear from you, and you can just pop it into the chat. What do you think is the most successful, easiest to read setting of the type 12 on 12? And just copy these numbers exactly how you see them here. 12/12, 12/15, or 12/18. Which ones are the ones that you would want to read if you had to read a whole book? want to see everyone give me their vote. I know that you're with me. Let's see you pop it in the chat. Okay, the 12/15s have it. And I think it's safe to say no one thinks the 12/12 is a good idea, right? We look at this and that looks like painful to read, right? So that's something to keep note of. You never want to match your type size to your leading. They should never be the same size. That is a type crime. And you're going to hear me use that terminology. I use that because I use Ellen Lupton's book, Thinking with Type, in my type class. I don't know if I have it here. Do I have it here? Oh, yeah, I do. And so Ellen's book, Thinking with Type, is she highlights type crimes that we want to avoid at all costs. So 12/12 type, that's a crime. No, no, no. And no one here chose that. Bravo. You all can see that that looks horrible and it's uncomfortable. The reason it's problematic is look at the ascenders and descenders. They're bumping into each other. That's a problem. Let's go over to 12/15 and 12/18. Now, there's quite a few choices for 12/15. They definitely are the winner, but there's quite a few of you that also thought 12/18 was a good choice. So both of them are not having the problem that the 12/12 is having, which is the ascenders and descenders bumping into each other. However, the brain struggles with that, and the brain equally struggles with too much space between lines. So the 12/18 has too much space between the lines. And what happens then when we're reading, our brain gets confused easily and it will lose its place in reading. And so you might find yourself reading the same line over and over again because there's too much leading in the paragraph. The good rule of thumb to pay attention to is 3 points more leading for the leading than the size of the point size. So if your point size is 12, 15 is that sweet spot. It's 3 points larger than the point size of our body copy. And so usually for most type, and this is just a generalization, if you have a typeface with a low X height, you're gonna maybe want only 2 points difference. If you have a high X height typeface, you might want 4 points. It just depends. So you have to take it and look at it with your eye and kind of really optically just make some of these decisions. But a good place to start is 3 points different. Does everyone understand what I'm referring to? Any questions? Okay, we're going to keep going. All right, now we're moving into grids. So let's break down the grid. If your grid relates to your leading, your lines of type will fall into the baseline grid. Now, what a baseline grid is, it's a grid that's used with your overall grid. In other words, we use multiple grids when we're creating documents. So in this last assignment, we didn't start with using baseline grids. We just focused on the column grid. But moving forward, we're now going to be using baseline grids. Baseline grids are referring to exactly what you might think. That sits on all of your type sits on a baseline. So we all know type sits on a baseline. So notice in this example, the blue lines are the baseline grid. The red lines are the modular grid. Notice how all of the body copy, the headline and the subhead are all sitting on the blue baseline grid. In other words, you want all of your type sitting on that same baseline grid so they're connected and they are flowing from one column to the next. And notice that, as you can see by these callouts, they are different in size and leading. So let's go over that. So the main headline is 32 by 48 over 48 point Scala Sans Pro bold. The subhead is 18 over 24 Scala Sans Pro italic. The caption is 9 over 12 Scala Sans Pro italic. And the primary text is 10 over 12 Scala Pro. This measure of the primary text is what determines the baseline grid. So our baseline grid is 12 points. But as you can see, my subhead is 24, my main headline is 48. Who can tell me how does that work with a 12-point baseline grid? And I'm looking for one of my former type students to answer this question. Or Zion, go for it.
Oh, I was going to ask, could you repeat the question?
Oh, the question is, all of the type is sitting on a 12-point baseline grid. How is it, if the baseline grid is 12-point, that our headline, which is 48-point letting, and our subhead, which is 24-point letting, is working and sitting on the same 12-point baseline grid?
It's a multiple of 12.
That's right. It's a multiple of 12. So when we're talking about choosing a baseline grid, we're going to be choosing it based on our primary body copy, our primary text. So in this example, our primary text is down here. It's 10 on 12. 12 is what we're going to make our baseline grid. The caption is 9 on 12, which is fine. It's an italic typeface. So they're going to go a little smaller so it sits out. Its caption wants to be a little different. It's italic, it's 9-point, but it's still 12-point letting. And our baseline grid and our subhead, our main headline and our subhead are both multiples of 12. Main headline is 48, which is a multiple of 12, and the subhead is 24, which is a multiple of 12. And that's what it has to be. So whatever you choose your baseline grid to be, any larger type, which needs more letting, is going to have to be a multiple of that baseline grid. So yes, there's a little math involved. There's definitely going to be a little math involved. Is everyone following? All right, awesome. Let's keep going. So once we understand, okay, so we're going to have these baseline grids once we get on the computer. But before we even get on the computer, we need to figure out what we're going to do with our layouts, and we're going to sketch our layouts relating to our concept. So our goal is to take grid paper. I recommend using grid paper for your grid sketches, and this is going to help you focus your structure of your designs. So you're going to want to do some very basic sketching, and I know we did a little bit of that for this project, but we're going to talk a little bit more about that. When you're sketching, you're not drawing out everything that's going to be on that page. You're using squares. You're going to put an X through them, which will incorporate that these are pictures. You're going to indicate body copy with just straight lines. And this is indicating justified text. If it's equal on both sides, it's indicating justified text. And so this, let me go back. This design here is an example of a sketch of this magazine to give you an idea. So it's just the art director and the designer are looking to create an idea of where the images are going to go, where are the captions, where are the headlines, where are the subheads, oops, right? And then if there's going to be a title or an ingredient. Really, your idea when you design grid sketches is to explore proportion, divide page space in a meaningful and aesthetic way. So let's talk about how do we go about doing that. So some of the ways, and we're going to get into more this semester, but the first ones, the beginning ones, are ratios, the golden section, and the Fibonacci sequence. Ratios are 1 unit to 2 units, simply a mathematical relationship between 2 grid measurements. It governs size and placement of text and images. The rule of thirds, oops. This grid system can be vertical or horizontal, but all the 9 spaces always have to be the exact size. The elements in the design are positioned 2 ways. Focus points are placed according to where the lines cross from top left, top right, bottom left, and then bottom right. Here's an example of following the rule of thirds. You're making sure that your design is balanced and proportional. It's used in graphic design and also photography. The next one that you might have heard of from other courses in art is the golden section. It's constructed from a square and 1 to 1.618. Now, the common printing paper size of 12 by 18 is not useful for the golden section. So you want to make sure you're aware of the actual sizes that work with your grid of choice. Here's an example of a photograph laid out using the composition is based on the golden section. Fibonacci sequence, a number is the sum of the two preceding numbers. 1 plus 1 equals 2, 2 plus 1 equals 3, 3 plus 2 equals 5, and so on. How can this be used for type? Well, by using it for a series of type sizes based on the Fibonacci sequence. So for example, 5 point, 8 point, 13 point, 21 point, 34 point, 55 point. So when you're thinking of hierarchy, typographic hierarchy on your page, you can use this Fibonacci sequence to help you make choices based on a sequence that has been around for ages. You can also double, so you can keep going up higher. And so as the numbers in the Fibonacci sequence increase, the proportions between any two numbers closely approximates the golden section. So the Fibonacci sequence and the golden sections are very similar and found in nature, as you can see by the example with the shell. Okay, so those are some of our ratios. Now we're going to get back into these different types of column grids. So a single column grid of text blocks used for book spreads and correspondence. This is like the earliest manuscripts that were designed, were all designed as a single column text block grid. And that's all of the original books, the Bibles that they were designing and printing. It's very static, it's very traditional. Multiple columns is more flexible and is commonly used for editorial. Here's an example of some designs that are made with a multiple column grid. And you can see the grid and the baseline grid. I also want to point out some of this dissection here. You can see the margins are laid out. Here's the margins. You can see the blue lines are the baseline grid. Here's a flow line that's been brought down to say this is where all our pages are going to start. The column interval, so the little gutter between the columns. Here's a text column, and then there's the margin. The next one we move into is modular. The modular grid is exactly that. It's designed that it has modules that you can work with. It's a unit usually derived from the leading, creating the baseline grid. It's a cousin of the columnar grid, but it has more information to help you make more choices. So here's the overall graphic of how this works. So you have your margin, which we did for our project we just completed. These medium blue lines are called flow lines when they are horizontal and gutters when they're vertical. The module is one square within this modular grid. You connect multiple grids together to put like a picture here or a paragraph of copy or whatever you want. That is a spatial zone where we connect them all. Can things go in the margin? Yes. Things like color or photos or page numbers can go in the margin. Margins define the live area of the page. So when you're hearing me talk about the live area of the page, it's the space between the edge of the format paper and the content of the design. That's the margin. And I want to show you guys, I just got this in the mail. Hold on, let me grab it. I just got a catalog in the mail. Okay. And I thought something was real interesting that I wanted to share with you. I want you to see what they did with their numbers. Hold on, let me get this. There. Do you see how they've cut off the number off the side of the page here. So throughout this, they're numbering there. It's not a page number, it's a number for the looks that they're highlighting. I want to show you a few of these. I just thought it was real interesting. Throughout the catalog, you can see they're purposely cutting off the numbers. So if they go off to the edge of the page and cut it, they know that that's what there's a choice they're making. So sometimes that is a design choice, but I just thought it was, you know, kind of an edgy choice. Okay, the modulars have this, each module has what we call an active corner, and it's that upper left-hand corner. It's considered an active corner, and that really plays a large role, especially in digital projects. Thinking of your phone screen or a website, where your eye's gonna go and where you're gonna go to innovate or I mean to activate a website or an app, it's gonna be that upper left-hand corner. Spatial zone is that group of modules, and the gutters and flow lines. A column is that vertical area, right? Even though in a modular grid, this is a column, one column. Markers can go in the margin. And here's an example of type laid in. So this type on the left is going over 2 columns, and the type on the right is going over 1 column. Improvisational structures. This is a flexible construction process which involves inserting typographic forms in space to establish form and constant content relationships, substituting these forms with revised forms as necessary and omitting forms that are inconsequential. We're going to move more and more into these improvisational structures this semester, really playing with how do we push the grid. One of our books that we're going to be using is, let me grab it. Making and breaking the grid. So the understanding of how do we use grids, but yet also how do we break the grids? And how do we make them work for us and for our needs? All right, and that's the end. Any questions as we, I know for a lot of us, this was a bit of a review, but I know for a lot of us, this is brand new. So I want to make sure answer any questions anyone might have.